Her name was Elara Tunnell, and she was an orphan. She lived on the far edge of Prosperity Gulch, where the town's hopeful grid gave way to unforgiving granite and wind-stunted pine. Her worldly possessions were few: a sway-backed horse named Beryl, a cabin built by her father, its timbers groaning in the ceaseless wind, a set of his tools, their steel cared for, their wooden handles worn smooth by his hands, and then hers. And the journals. There were 12 of them, bound in cracked leather, filled with her father's precise, angular script. He had not been a simple man. He was a geologist by trade and a naturalist by soul, a man who saw stories in stone and warnings in the flight patterns of birds. He had written of cycles, not the simple cycles of season to season, but of deeper, colder, more ancient rhythms buried in the land itself. He wrote of a great freeze, a winter that was not a season, but an event, a thing of mythic violence that came once every 100 years to scour the landscape clean. His final entries were filled with a desperate urgency, calculations of barometric pressure, notes on the unusual thickness of beaver dams in the high country, and sketches of the granite bluff that loomed behind their small cabin. It was this bluff that now consumed Elara's waking hours. She possessed her father's knowledge, but not his standing. To the people of Prosperity Gulch, she was just the quiet woman who lived at the end of the road, the odd orphan who kept to herself. Her plan, born from the pages of those journals, was simple in concept and monumental in execution. She would not build up against the wind and the cold. She would dig in. She would carve a home from the very heart of the granite bluff, a series of chambers deep enough to borrow the earth's own steady warmth, a sanctuary immune to the most brutal winter the sky could deliver. She called it the Winter Warren. The first official resistance came in the form of Mayor Thompson. She went to him not for permission, but for resources. The old silver mine had left behind a surplus of blasting powder, stored in the town's locked powder house. She offered to buy it. "Buy it for what?" the mayor asked, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. Elara explained her project. She spoke of geothermal mass, of insulation factors, of the deep and abiding cold her father had predicted. The mayor listened with a patient, condescending smile. When she finished, he chuckled. It was a soft, dismissive sound that filled his dusty office. "Miss Tunnell," he said, his voice thick with false sympathy. "People live in houses, with windows and porches. We are a civilized people. We don't live in holes in the ground like badgers." He denied her request for the powder. He cited safety concerns. He spoke of town ordinances. But his eyes said she was mad. The story of the mad orphan and her badger hole spread through Prosperity Gulch like a grass fire. It became the preferred topic of gossip at the general store. It was a source of great amusement. Dr. Finch, a man whose education in the East had left him with an unshakable faith in modern methods, offered his professional opinion over a game of checkers. "To live underground," he declared, moving a piece with a confident snap, "is to invite sickness. The dampness seeps into the lungs. The lack of sunlight breeds a profound melancholia. It is unhygienic and, frankly, primitive." The most vocal of her mockers was Mr. Abernathy. He was the wealthiest man in the county, a rancher whose fortune was built on timber and cattle. He was, at that very moment, constructing a monument to his own success. On the highest hill overlooking the town, his crew was erecting a grand 2-story manor with wraparound porches and enormous panes of glass imported all the way from St. Louis. He called it Pinnacle House. Abernathy found Elara's project to be a personal affront to his own vision of progress. While we reach for the sky, he boomed to his admirers at the saloon, she digs for worms. He coined the name that would stick to her project for years. Tunnell's Folly. The name was cruel, and it was catchy. Soon, the town had adopted it completely. The phrase, digging a tunnel, became local slang for embarking on a pointless, doomed, and foolish task. She was no longer Elara. She was the Dugout Widow, a title both inaccurate and demeaning, whispered by women as she passed them on the street. Elara heard the whispers.
She saw the smirks and the pitying glances. She did not react.
Her father's journals were her shield. His certainty was her armor. Denied the expediency of blasting powder, she turned to older, slower methods. Her father had described them in detail. Fire setting. She and Beryl hauled cords of deadfall pine to the base of the bluff. She would build a massive bonfire against the granite face, letting it rage for hours until the rock itself glowed a sullen red in the twilight. Then came the water. She hauled it bucket by bucket from the creek, a brutal, back-breaking process. The instant the cold water hit the superheated rock, the air would fill with a deafening crackle and hiss. The granite, shocked by the sudden change in temperature, would fracture and split. The next day, she would go to work with a sledgehammer and a set of steel wedges, breaking apart the shattered rock. It was grueling, punishing labor.
Inch by inch, foot by foot, she drove her tunnel into the heart of the mountain.
The first summer was spent creating the initial opening, a gaping maw in the side of the bluff. The townsfolk would sometimes ride out to watch the spectacle. They would sit on their horses at a safe distance, watching the lone woman toil against the stone, and they would shake their heads. Madness. Utter madness. Beryl, her horse, was her only companion. He was her confidant, the silent witness to her struggle. She rigged a sled, and he hauled away the endless tons of shattered rock, his powerful muscles straining with the effort. She spoke to him in the quiet evenings, grooming his coat, telling him of the progress they had made, repeating the words from her father's journals as if they were scripture. The first chamber took her an entire year to complete. It was a large circular room with a domed ceiling, painstakingly smoothed with a chisel.
She began the second chamber, the larder, and a third, which would be a stable for Beryl.
Her work was not just brute force, it was intelligent. She followed her father's designs with meticulous care. She carved 2 ventilation shafts, one low to the ground to draw in fresh, cold air, and one high in the ceiling to expel warm, stale air. The physics of the thermal siphon were simple and perfect. Her chimney flue was a work of genius, a long, angled channel carved through the rock. It was designed to draw smoke with incredible efficiency and to double as a smokehouse for curing meat. She lined the walls of the main living chamber with soapstone slabs she quarried from a deposit miles away. The stone was soft and easy to work, and it possessed a unique quality. It absorbed heat slowly and radiated it back even more slowly. A small fire, burning for just an hour, would keep the soapstone warm for a full day.
While the men in town were building with wood that would rot and glass that would break,
Elara was building with permanence. She was building with the earth itself. The second year passed in a blur of smoke, sweat, and stone dust. The warren grew. It became a system of interconnected rooms, a hidden fortress. She spent the evenings of that second winter carving furniture from the rock itself, a bed platform, a table, benches. Her food preservation was an operation of immense scale. She planted a huge garden, and what she didn't eat fresh, she preserved. Hundreds of jars of beans, corn, and tomatoes lined the shelves of her stone larder. She smoked fish from the creek and cured venison from the deer she hunted. She dried apples and berries on vast racks. Her larder was not for a single winter. It was for a siege. Meanwhile, on the hill, Abernathy's pinnacle house was completed. It was a marvel of modern construction, a boast made of timber and glass. He held a grand party to celebrate its completion. The whole town was invited. From her cabin, Elara could see the lights blazing from its many windows, a defiant constellation against the dark hill. She could hear the faint sound of music and laughter carried on the wind. It did not bother her. She had her father's words. She had the solid feel of the stone around her. The autumn of the third year arrived, and with it came the signs. They were subtle at first, easily missed by those who did not know what to look for. The squirrels were no longer just busy, they were frantic. They stripped the pine trees bare, hoarding cones with a manic, desperate energy Elara had never witnessed before. The geese and ducks, usually present until the first hard frost, were gone. They had vanished from the sky in early September, a full month ahead of their usual migration. Then came the silence. The normal hum of insects in the afternoon faded away. The birdsong in the mornings grew thin, then stopped entirely. The forest fell into a deep, listening quiet that felt ancient and ominous. The final sign came on a calm afternoon in late October. A strange, metallic scent on the air. The smell of ozone. The smell of the sky changing its very nature. Elara checked her father's journal. It was all there. The frenzied gathering of animals, the early migration, the great silence, the scent of cold iron in the wind. The time was now. A flicker of doubt, of social duty, crossed her mind. Should she warn them? Should she ride into town and stand before the mayor and tell him what was coming? The memory of his condescending chuckle stopped her. The memory of Abernathy's sneer, the whispers of dugout widow. They had built their world on pride and progress. They would not listen to a warning from the woman who lived in Tunnell's Folly. A warning would only bring more scorn, more ridicule. They had made their choice. She had made hers. Her final preparations were calm and methodical. She brought Beryl into the deep, sheltered stable she had carved for him, its floor thick with clean straw. She hauled the last of her seasoned firewood inside, stacking it neatly against a soapstone wall. She checked the seals on her food stores, the function of her ventilation shafts, the level of water in her stone cistern. Everything was in order. On the morning of October 27th, she stood for a moment at the entrance to her warren, looking out at the town of Prosperity Gulch. It looked peaceful, oblivious, nestled in the valley below. Then she turned, stepped inside, and rolled the heavy, insulated stone door into place. A thick wooden beam, set into iron brackets she had forged herself, slid into place, sealing her in. The light from the outside world was gone. The silence was absolute. She was alone, in the heart of the mountain. The change began at 3:14 in the afternoon. The temperature, a mild 50 degrees, dropped to 20 in the space of an hour. An hour after that, it was 0. The wind arrived not as a gradual building, but as a sudden, violent blow, a physical impact that shook the town to its foundations. Then, the snow started. It was not the gentle, fluffy snow of a normal winter. It was a fine, dry, crystalline powder, like sand or sugar. It did not fall. It was driven, horizontally, by the gale force winds. It found every crack, every seam, every tiny opening in the town's proud wooden buildings. This was the sugar snow her father had written of, the precursor. The true storm, the great white death, arrived that night. It was a storm of impossible scale, a thing from a forgotten age. The snow was heavy and wet, falling with a speed and density that was terrifying. In town, the failure of conventional systems was swift and total. At Pinnacle House, Mr. Abernathy's monument to progress, the first catastrophe struck. The immense pressure difference between the super-chilled air outside and the heated air inside caused his magnificent imported panes of glass to explode inward. The wind and snow gutted the grand house in minutes. Throughout the town, roofs designed for a normal snow load began to groan under the unimaginable weight. The first to collapse was the roof of the general store, its main beam snapping with the sound of a cannon shot. The town's water tower, a symbol of its civic engineering, froze solid. The expanding ice split its iron seams, and it stood useless, a frozen monument to a world that no longer existed. The telegraph lines, thick with ice, snapped and went silent. The railroad tracks, the town's lifeline to the outside world, vanished under 10, then 20 feet of snow. Prosperity Gulch was cut off. It was alone, and it was dying. Inside the winter warren, Elara was safe. The storm was not a roar, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone. It was the sound of the world ending, heard from a great and insulated distance. Her single, small fire of seasoned oak burned cleanly in the stone hearth. The soapstone walls soaked up its heat, radiating a gentle, consistent warmth. The temperature inside the main chamber held at a steady 55 degrees. She ate a simple meal of smoked venison and preserved beans. She read her father's journals by the light of a tallow candle. She cared for Beryl, who stood calmly in his stone stall, untroubled by the tempest raging 100 feet above him. Her life continued in a serene, ordered rhythm, while outside, chaos and cold reigned supreme. The storm raged without pause for 6 days and 6 nights. When it finally stopped, the world was remade. The sun rose on a landscape of impossible white. The valley was filled, buried under 30 feet of dense, packed snow. Only the steeple of the church and the top floors of the tallest buildings were visible, like islands in a frozen sea. The cold did not relent. The temperature remained at 40 degrees below zero. For the survivors in town, the end of the storm was not a reprieve. It was the beginning of a new, slower kind of death. They were trapped in their damaged homes. Food was scarce. Firewood, their only source of heat, was running out. The first to venture out was Dr. Finch. The roof of his modern, well-built house had collapsed, pinning his wife's legs. He had managed to free her, but her feet were badly frozen. His own medical supplies were buried or destroyed. Driven by desperation, he remembered the plume of smoke he had sometimes seen rising from the bluff at the edge of town. The madwoman's folly. It took him 4 hours to struggle through the deep snow, a journey that would normally take 10 minutes. He arrived at the bluff to find nothing but a sheer wall of snow. He almost gave up, but then he saw it. A faint, dark circle in the snow, where the heat from the hidden ventilation shaft had melted a shallow depression. He began to dig with his bare, freezing hands. He screamed Elara's name until his throat was raw. Inside, Elara heard the faint, desperate cries. She unbarred the heavy door and rolled the stone aside. Dr. Finch fell into the opening, a half-frozen, sobbing wreck. His face was a mask of ice and frozen tears. He looked at the warm, calm space, at the jars of food, at the steady fire. He looked at Elara, his eyes filled with a shame so profound, it was painful to witness. "Help us," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, my wife. She's dying." Elara did not say, "I told you so." She did not gloat. She did not mention his pronouncements on lung sickness and melancholia. She simply nodded. "Bring her here," she said. And so began the procession of the humbled. Dr. Finch returned with his wife, carried on a makeshift sled. Elara tended to the woman's frostbite with poultices and salves, her hands gentle and sure. The next day, 2 more families arrived, their faces gaunt with hunger and cold. They had followed Finch's tracks, their last desperate hope. Elara welcomed them in. The warren, which had been her solitary sanctuary, became a refuge. Wordlessly, she assumed command. She was no longer the outcast, the fool. She was their leader. She organized the small, growing community. She rationed her vast stores of food, ensuring everyone had enough. She assigned tasks, teaching the men how to bank the fire for maximum efficiency, the women how to prepare meals with the preserved goods. They watched her, these people who had scorned her, and they saw a wisdom they could not comprehend. They saw that her folly was the most sensible thing ever built in the valley. The last to arrive were the men who had been her chief mockers. Mayor Thompson came first, carrying his young son, who was wrapped in blankets but shivering uncontrollably, his breath coming in shallow rasps. The mayor's face was grey, his authority stripped away by the cold. He could not meet Elara's eyes. He simply held out his child, a silent plea. Behind him staggered Mr. Abernathy. The proud rancher was a broken man. His fine coat was torn, his face blackened by frostbite. His pinnacle house, his monument of glass and pride, was a frozen tomb. His wife had not survived the first night. He stumbled into the warmth of the warren and collapsed, his body shaking with sobs of grief and shame. He looked at the solid stone walls, the smart design, the abundance of resources. He looked at the woman he had ridiculed. And he finally understood. The Great Freeze lasted for 3 months. In that time, 23 of the town's survivors lived in the winter warren. They all survived. They lived because of the foresight of the woman they had called a fool. When the great thaw finally began in late March, it was a slow and messy affair. The world re-emerged from its white tomb, battered and broken. The town of Prosperity Gulch was in ruins, but its people were alive. One of the first things they did was hold a town meeting. They did not gather in the mayor's office, which was a wreck, but in the stone church, the only public building that had remained largely intact. Elara was there, standing quietly at the back. Mayor Thompson, Dr. Finch, and Mr. Abernathy walked to the front of the congregation. They stood before their friends and neighbours, before the people they had led to the brink of destruction. It was Mayor Thompson who spoke first, his voice hollow. "We were proud," he said. "We believed that our modern ways, our new buildings, made us strong. We were wrong. Our strength was a fiction." Dr. Finch spoke next. "I put my faith in books and theories," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I dismissed wisdom that was older and truer than my own. I called it primitive. That primitive wisdom is the only reason any of us are alive today." Then Mr. Abernathy, the wealthiest and proudest of them all, stepped forward. He turned and looked directly at Elara. His eyes were clear, stripped of all arrogance. I mocked you, he said, his voice ringing through the silent church. I called your work Tunnell's Folly. I was the fool. You saw the truth, and we were blind. You were right, we were wrong. Our pride almost killed us all. He then addressed the town. I propose, he said, that we learn, that we ask Miss Tunnell to teach us, that we rebuild, not with pride, but with wisdom. All eyes turned to Elara. She stepped forward from the shadows. She did not offer forgiveness, for there was nothing to forgive. Their mockery had never touched her. Her response was as practical and solid as the stone she lived in. Survival is not about pride, she said, her voice quiet but firm. It is about listening to the earth. It is about preparation. I will teach you what my father taught me. And so the transformation of Prosperity Gulch began. They rebuilt their town, but they rebuilt it differently. They dug deep cellars for food and supplies. They built their new homes partially underground, sheltered from the wind, using the principles of Elara's warren. Mr. Abernathy spent his remaining fortune helping to fund the construction of a large communal shelter, a massive version of the winter warren built into the same granite bluff. The phrase, digging a tunnel, was reborn. It no longer meant to engage in a foolish act. It came to mean acting with uncommon foresight, preparing with great wisdom and care. Elara Tunnell lived for another 40 years. She never married. She never had children of her own. She remained in her winter warren, a solitary figure who was now the most respected person in the valley. She became their teacher, their sage, the keeper of the old ways. People came to her not for gossip, but for advice on when to plant, when to harvest, and how to read the signs of the coming winter. She never fully rejoined their community, but she was its anchor, its quiet, steadfast heart. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, in the stone-carved bed in the heart of the mountain. The entire town mourned her passing. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They interred her in a small, sealed chamber she had prepared herself, high on the bluff overlooking her life's work. The town's name was officially changed. Prosperity Gulch, a name built on hope and hubris, was erased from the maps. In its place was a new name, a name that honored their savior and the lesson she had taught them. Tunnels Deep. Over the main entrance to the winter warren, which was preserved as a historical monument and the town's permanent emergency shelter, they placed a simple bronze plaque. Its inscription served as a final, lasting testament to her legacy. It read, "She saw the truth of the earth, and the earth gave her shelter. Let us not be so blind again."